Ireland stood in a precarious balance. The new Irish Republic was filled with corruption and factionalism, and the Prussian influence gradually replaced the French in a long line of foreign rule. Thomas Costello stood in the new Dublin capital with a new plan to oust his rivals. Lynch and McKenna had de facto access to public funds due to their positions in the civilian and military administrations respectively. Costello wanted to rectify this. He unveiled his new plan, of course approved by the Prussian officials in Wexford, to create the Irish Central Bank and the standard Irish pound. The central bank would be controlled directly by the Dublin government, and while old pounds would remain legal tender to stop a potential revolt, new pounds would gradually begin to be printed. Costello ordered the central bank to print double the funds that Lynch and McKenna had combined, without regard to gold or foreign currency reserves. A prospective loan from the Prussians was used to show the stability of the currency, and investors' money was paid to other investors to show profits. Gradually, Costello began to eclipse his rivals. That was until the scheme came crashing down. On July 5, 1795, a series of foreign investors, most notably from the Ickrians, had heard rumors of the Irish pound's instability and asked for it to be traded into gold. The central bank waited a day before responding that they could only redeem 50% in gold. This prompted more investors to redeem their gold until it gradually became clear that the Irish pound was built upon nothing. Costello was partying with his friends when he heard the news, and immediately ordered that the bank be closed for the week. This stopped any more withdrawals but turned into a complete crisis as every foreign investor began descending on the bank. Gradually, everyday citizens began flocking as well as the Irish currency crashed completely. Merchants in Dublin began marching down the streets and it seemed like a riot was brewing. Costello immediately sent a message to the Prussians in Wexford requesting Marines be sent to the capital. However, this message was intercepted by Lynch, who spread it to everybody in the government. Costello stood in the president's chamber of the capital as he saw soldiers marching down the horizon. He began walking out to greet them until he saw in the distance their green uniforms. As it turned out, Richard McKenna had seen the message already, and moved in his forces outside of Dublin before the Prussians could arrive. They were stationed outside the central bank and stopped the riot from spreading. However, as the days passed, they would not leave. One week later, the Prussians arrived, not with an army but with a small contingent of Marines flanking Foreign Minister August von Hardenberg and various officials of the Prussian Central Bank. Hardenberg informed Costello that for Prussia's aid, an economic recovery plan would have to be followed according to the Prussian Central Bank's advice. Taxes would be raised amongst the farmers, tariffs would be removed for the Prussian merchants, and the Prussian Central Bank would only approve loans if the Irish gave them discounted rates for a new Irish pound. In addition to this, a permanent embassy would be established in Dublin with 700 Marines stationed in the nearby area to immediately address any threats in the capital. Costello was conflicted, but eventually had no choice but to agree to the plan. Lynch immediately spread word throughout the nation that Costello had sold out to the Prussians. McKenna's forces still refused to leave Dublin. Costello requested that Callahan's Belfast forces come to Dublin, but Callahan's only reply was, "I don't see the necessity in that." It seemed as if something was brewing, and 2 months after the first bank run, Costello turned to the Prussians once again. They established the Irish Home Legion, a group of entirely Irish soldiers under the Reichsmarine command structure. Home Legion soldiers were deployed outside of the Capitol building and all civilian administration buildings. McKenna, however, still remained in Dublin. Regardless, the reconstruction process occurred in accordance with the Prussians' plans. The rural poor felt the weight of the taxes, and Ireland would grow to become entirely dependent on Prussian aid. The new Irish pound began to recover, until a new disaster presented itself. In January of 1796, a foreign investor requested his pounds be cashed, a regular order. The central bank began processing it until they frantically closed the bank. Costello received the message an hour later. They were out of liquid gold reserves. Costello was stunned. He had followed the Prussians' plans and ensured internally that they didn't go for their gold reserve supplies. Unbeknownst to him, John Lynch had been misrepresenting the numbers and had deliberately pushed the Irish pound over what it could sustain. Another run of the banks began, much worse than the first. As the day turned to night, Dublin was in flames as McKenna's army sat idly by. The Irish Home Guard was only capable of holding the capital, and Costello went through a secret tunnel to meet with the Prussian ambassador in Dublin to request Marine deployment. He was informed then that he would have to sign the terms for Irish security for any aid to be sent. He looked at the terms and was shocked. The Prussian mark would become the official currency of Ireland. the Prussian central bank would have control over Irish economic affairs. Ireland would not be allowed to leave the PAZ for the next 10 years, and most humiliatingly of all, Wexford and a 10-mile radius around it would be ceded to Prussia for an indefinite period of time. He outright rejected at first, but as the hours passed and rioters spread throughout the streets, he finally accepted. The Prussian Marines were deployed and the city was retaken. The next morning, Costello stood in the battered city, abhorred at what he had done, and left only with shame. As the election came up that year, he knew he wouldn't win. So, he contacted his friends in Berlin and had the Marines and Home Legion soldiers stationed outside of all polling booths. He sat despondent in the capital, leaving most affairs to Lynch as he gradually fell into a deep depression. He contemplated suicide frequently, though never did anything. After 6 months of phony rule, he awoke to soldiers marching through the capital. He was informed by McKenna that he had been deposed, and went quietly into exile. McKenna was met with great enthusiasm for overthrowing the old president. The Irish people had finally hoped that they had a leader who would represent them, and not the will of foreign powers. This hope, however, was short-lived. McKenna privately agreed to all of the same conditions that his predecessor had, though promised to oust the Prussians in public. In addition to this, the support he had amongst the public had immediately gone to his head. People began to feel that he wouldn't be a leader for the Irish people, but rather for himself. This was confirmed when a month into his reign he declared himself the King of Ireland and planned a lavish coronation with public funds. This was unanimously hated, and within the week he was ousted by John Lynch with the support of army officers. McKenna was executed, and the army officers began discussing with Lynch about plans to free Ireland. Lynch initially went with them, but gradually felt threatened by the army's influence. So, he of course went to the Prussians asking that they could support him in abolishing the Irish army and replacing it with the Irish Home Legion. As the army was gradually demobilized in Dublin, Prussian Marines and Home Legion soldiers began occupying armories in critical positions. All the officers unwilling to serve under the new Prussian generals were dismissed and stripped of any weapons and rank. The one exception was Colonel Edward Callahan's forces, who were still fully mobilized and could potentially coup the government. They received a special deal where they would be permitted to remain autonomous, though officially under the Prussians' commands, a deal that Callahan accepted. And with this, Ireland was essentially under Prussian control. Bizarrely though, Lynch despised the Prussians, and frequently did everything in his power to undermine them. This, however, was complicated by the fact that he was entirely dependent on the Prussians for his continued rule. One moment he would be contacting foreign countries in secret meetings to remove the Prussian influence, and the next moment he'd be begging for soldiers to put down rebellions with. The people of Ireland seemed truly broken. Nearly 4 regime changes in the last 10 years, all making them closer and closer to puppets of a foreign government. It seemed as if hope was fading, that the Irish people were truly doomed to eternal oppression. However, it would take more to truly break the will of the Irish people, and until then they would remain, although dormant, steadfast in their desire for freedom and liberation. But until then, John Lynch rules as the current line in a long list of buffoonish tyrants who have forsaken everything given to them for the simple lust of power. Maybe, someday in the future, things will get better. One can only hope.
I kissed my girl by the factory wall. Dirty old town, dirty old town, dirty old town.